funny to meditate on a gospel that you've heard very often throughout your life. And certainly the story of the widow of Nain is one that's known to us, and it's one that we hear perhaps even more than once during the year. And yet this time, as I was meditating on it, I thought of it in terms of our own age, particularly during this season when we're concentrating on politics. We begin to wonder if anything ever happens spontaneously. Politicians are always going to a place and they just happen to meet somebody who's a faithful follower of their political party, who happens to own a little restaurant that just happens to be filled with security guards right now. And they stop in for a little planned lunch. Everything is all planned out so that it will make an impact. And I don't believe, when we read the gospel, sometimes we can think, these miracles of Jesus were all kind of planned out ahead of time by his advance men, who were preparing an opportunity for Jesus to teach something theologically important at that moment, or that Jesus was looking for an opportunity to preach. And I think that is almost certainly missing the point. What Jesus did when he came among us was he walked the streets. Now, he did go to certain places intentionally because he wanted his message to get around. But I think a lot of the things that happened were God meeting his people exactly as they were, in the spontaneity of the moment. And then God reaching out spontaneously in that moment becomes a teachable moment, doesn't it? Because it becomes a moment of encounter between God and his people, which always has a higher purpose to it, and a higher message, or a deeper message, if you wish. I think that's what happened here. In the spontaneity of the moment, Jesus comes upon this little scenario. If you've ever been out of the country, you know that it's not uncommon, particularly in places where the people are still relatively poor, that you could be walking down the street and all of a sudden be in the middle of a funeral. I was in Mexico once, and that happened to me. I was downtown in Mexico, and I was doing a little shopping in the local, they weren't really stores, they were just little places that you walked up to buy something. And all of a sudden I was in the middle of this little band that was coming down, and it was in the middle of a funeral. And most of the people were just going on doing their business, but it just fascinated me that all this could be happening just spontaneously. So Jesus finds himself as he's walking through this town in the company of the mourners for this funeral, and he notices the woman whose son had died, and she was a widow, and she had just this one son, and he was dead. So now she was alone. And Jesus recognized, because he's a man of his culture, he recognizes that this is a woman in trouble. This is a woman in very grave trouble. Because one of the preeminent images in the Old Testament, even, of powerlessness was the widow. The widow was one of the most important images in a patriarchal society of one who could no longer take care of himself. Unless you had a man to stand up for you, you were lost. And that seems strange to us, perhaps, but in that culture, that was why being a widow was such a terrible, terrible situation to be in, particularly if you had no male heirs or children and so forth to take care of. Explains the sadness surrounding Martha and Mary at the death of Lazarus, doesn't it? Because now all of a sudden, although they're not, this was their brother, he was the male that took care of the family, and all of a sudden now these two gals were left with no one, and probably advanced in years. So this was a real catastrophe. And Jesus reaches out to the powerless at this moment. And he restores her son to her, which is a remarkable deed to begin with. It's a symbol of resurrection. It's a symbol of Jesus breaking traditions. And never we're supposed to go near a corpse and reach out to be touching a corpse and so forth. Absolutely rendered you unclean and all the rest. To take a hopeless situation and to give such great hope to it. Hope for this woman. And life. To restore life where life seemed to be gone. All the messages of Jesus' ministry come there. Salvation, hope, new life are all present in this beautiful little story, which unfolds, as I said before, I think, in the spontaneity of the moment in which God reaches out to his people in a special way. And the early church did not miss that symbol. We know that later on, while Jesus is even on the cross, he's concerned about his soon-to-be widowed and for a mother who will have no one to care for her, and gives her St. John to look after her. And so even from the cross, he's concerned about that. But we know that that ministry that goes back even here to the woman of Nain, to the widow of Nain, that ministry was very important in the early church. Whenever it's mentioned, the charitable works of the early church, one of the most important was the widows and orphans. One of the most important groups that needed our care and our protection at that time. And one of the groups that was seen as providing a very special ministry within the church as well. So what does this mean for us? It means that the church, as a continuation of the work of Christ, needs to be constantly reaching out to the powerless and giving them hope. And the powerless are all around us, not necessarily widows and orphans, although it may include them, but people in all kinds of very difficult straits, and particularly in our own economy right now. The work of Christ, the work of salvation, the work of hope, and trust in God's love and goodness is continued in the church through our awareness of and our response to all of those who find themselves powerless in our society.